You will be alone in this glass tower until it forgets your name, Mr. Ashford, and when it does, I hope you remember that 5 of us tried." Danielle Rourke said it with her coat already on, one hand on the strap of a bag she had packed at her desk in under 4 minutes. She did not raise her voice. That was the thing about the ones who lasted longest before they left. They stopped shouting somewhere around the 3rd month, and by the time they walked out, they only sounded tired. Julian Ashford did not look up from the contract in front of him. What none of them understood, not the 5 who had gone, not the man who let each of them go, was that the 6th was already downstairs in the lobby, holding a plain folder against her chest, and inside it, in a hand none of them would recognize, were the rules that would take this cold, glittering life apart at the seams. But that was still an hour away. First there was Danielle, and the door and the silence Julian preferred to keep. The office sat 41 floors above a July that shimmered off the avenue in long ribbons of heat. Down there, car horns answered car horns, and the smell of warm asphalt and roasting nuts drifted up through no window at all, because none of the windows opened. Up here the air was cooled to a museum hush, faintly metallic, and the only sound was the tick of a very old clock Julian kept on the credenza, the one object in the room that did not gleam. "You've drafted a resignation," he said. "Leave it with Marguerite." Marguerite left in May. That was number 4. Danielle's laugh had no bottom to it. "You don't even know which of us is gone. I know the work gets done. The work gets done because we do it terrified." She shifted the bag higher. Behind her, through the glass wall, the open floor of Ashford Holdings had gone still, 30 analysts pretending to read screens. "I scheduled your dinners. I remembered your sister's birthday, so you could forget it, with a clear conscience. I stood outside that door on the 19th of every month while you sat in here in the dark, and I never once asked why. Because asking was the thing that got Marguerite dismissed." Something moved across Julian's face, and was gone, fast as a shadow off water. "Then you learnt the job," he said. "I learnt to survive you. That's different." She set a single sheet on the corner of his desk, squared to the edge, because even leaving she had absorbed his habits. "There's a 6th one coming today. The agency sent her over my head. I saw the email this morning. Whoever she is, she doesn't know yet. Tell her about the 19th. Tell her one true thing before she wastes a year of her life learning it the way I did." Julian finally lifted his eyes. They were a pale, exhausted grey, the colour of a winter that had wandered into the wrong season, and for 1 second they were not cruel at all, only very far away. "There's nothing to tell," he said. "There's everything to tell. You just don't have anyone left who'll listen while you don't say it." Danielle pulled the door open. The floor beyond exhaled. "Goodbye, Mr. Ashford. I really did try." The door sighed shut on its pneumatic hinge. Julian sat still for a moment in the recirculated cold. Then he reached out and, with 2 fingers, moved the resignation letter a half-inch to the left, until its edge ran exactly parallel to the edge of the desk. Only then did the tightness go out of his shoulders. It was a small correction. It was the only kind he allowed himself. 41 floors down, the 6th one was signing the visitor log. Maren Kelly wrote her name in full because half measures made her nervous, and pressed her thumb to the wet ink out of an old habit before she remembered she was 31, and this was a marble lobby with a chandelier the size of a small car. She wiped her thumb on the inside of her bag. The folder she carried was not hers. It had been handed to her that morning by a woman at the placement agency who would not quite meet her eyes. Ashford Holdings requested a specific candidate profile, the agency woman had said, sliding the folder across the desk. Discreet, unshockable. No, how do I put this? No need to be liked. You've done estate work, elder care, a hospice front desk. You don't rattle. I don't rattle. Maren agreed. What's in the folder? His preferences. Read it in the cab, not the lobby. Miss Kelly. 5 people have held this post since March. 5. Maren had let the number sit on her tongue. In one summer, he's particular, the agency woman had straightened a stapler that did not need straightening. The fee is triple standard. There's a reason it's triple. Now, in the elevator, Maren opened the folder at last. Not his preferences. She'd expected coffee orders, a no eye contact clause, the petty commandments of a difficult man. Instead, the top page was a photocopy of something handwritten, the loops soft and quick. A woman's hand slanted with warmth. At the top, underlined twice, for whoever comes after me. Be patient with him. He is not cruel. He is only guarding the door. Maren read it twice. The elevator rose. Her stomach did the thing it did on ladders. That's not his handwriting, she said aloud, to no one, because the numbers were climbing past 30, and there was a specific smell in the brushed steel car. Cold citrus. Expensive. The scent of a building that had never once been allowed to sweat, and something about it made her want to hear a human voice. Even her own. The doors opened on 41, to a floor gone quiet as a held breath. A woman in her 60s intercepted her before she'd taken 3 steps, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had watched empires misbehave and lived to fold their laundry. Silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a cardigan even in July, because the building kept every room at the temperature of a wine cellar. You'll be the 6th, the woman said. I'm Mrs. Okafor. I keep the residence, which is upstairs, and my sanity, which is nowhere in this building. You've eaten? Good. Number 3 fainted on day 1 and we don't discuss it. Maren Kelly. She put out her hand. Do people usually make it to lunch? People usually make it to the elevator and then reconsider their whole lives. Mrs. Okafor's handshake was dry and firm. She looked at Maren the way a jeweler looks at a stone brought in off the street, not unkind, only thorough. You're calmer than the others. That's either very good or the first sign of a poor imagination. He's expecting you. A word before you go in. Please, whatever he says in the next 10 minutes, he does not mean the half of it, and the half he means he'll take back by Thursday. Mrs. Okafor lowered her voice, and something moved under the dryness, something protective and old. There's a good man in there, under about 9 years of frost. I've stopped waiting for the thaw. But I haven't stopped keeping the kettle on. Go in. Don't let him see you flinch, and for the love of heaven don't ask him about the 19th. The 19th of what? Exactly, said Mrs. Okafor, and steered her toward the glass door, with one warm hand between her shoulder blades. Julian Ashford was standing at the window when Maren came in, hands clasped behind his back, a tall dark shape against a hazed gold skyline. He did not turn around. You're 11 minutes early, he said. The agency told you to be early to demonstrate reliability. It demonstrates instead that you have nothing else in your day. Which is it? Both, Maren said. I like being early because it means I don't have to run, and I have nothing else in my day because I quit my last job to take this one. So you get a reliable person with an empty calendar. That's a bargain, if you think about it. That turned him around. Up close he was younger than the frost made him. Perhaps 38, and better looking than a man that unhappy had any right to be, which she filed away as inconvenient and unimportant. His suit was the soft charcoal of money that never announces itself. His eyes went over her the way Mrs. Okafor's had, but colder, hunting for the flinch. You've read my file, he said. I read a folder. I'm not sure it was your file. Danielle briefed you on the way out. What did she say? That 5 people tried. Maren kept her voice level, set her bag down on the chair without being invited, because a person who waited to be invited in this room would wait a long time. She seemed sad about it, not angry. Sad, that's rarer than you'd think in a person leaving a job. Usually they're angry. Julian's jaw set. It was the tell, though she didn't know it yet, the small hardening at the hinge of the jaw when a sentence got too close to the door he guarded. I don't require you to understand the people who leave, he said. I require you to answer a phone, manage a calendar, and never, this is the only rule that matters, never rearrange my private schedule. Not a lunch, not a car, not a single appointment marked personal. You will see one such block recurring on the calendar. You will not touch it. You will not ask about it. If you cannot agree to that in this room, right now, we will save each other a great deal of time. The heat of the city pressed against the sealed glass. Somewhere below, a siren rose and thinned to nothing. Maren looked at this cold, careful man, squaring the pane in himself to the edge of the desk, and thought of the soft handwriting in the folder. He is not cruel. He is only guarding the door, and made a decision that would cost her a year of her life and give her back a great deal more. I can agree to that, she said. The block is yours. I'll build a wall around it and forget the wall is there. Good, on one condition. The word landed in the museum air like a dropped cup. Nobody, in the history of this office, had answered a Julian Ashford ultimatum with a counteroffer. Out on the floor, an analyst actually stood up to see better, and then thought better of it. You're not in a position to set conditions, Julian said. Then, you can hire the seventh. Maren smiled, and it wasn't a challenge, which was what undid him. It was warm. The smile of a woman who had sat at a lot of bedsides and stopped being afraid of difficult men some years ago. My condition is small. If I'm going to protect a thing on your calendar with my whole professional life, I get to know one true thing about the person I work for. Not about the block. About you. One true thing. You pick which. Julian stared at her. The clock on the credenza ticked into the silence, patient as a pulse. I take my coffee black, he said at last. Everyone knows that one. It's on page 1 of the folder that isn't your file. She tilted her head. Try again. One true thing. And Julian Ashford, who had made grown executives cry in this room, who had watched 5 capable people gather their coats and their dignity, and go, heard himself say, in a voice gone unexpectedly low, I haven't slept a full night in this apartment in 9 years. He stopped, as appalled as if she'd reached into his chest and taken something. That's enough. That's your one thing. You start Monday. Mrs. Okafor will show you the desk. Thank you. Maren picked up her bag. She did not make it soft, did not thank him for the confession, because she understood already that pity would end her here faster than incompetence. She simply put the true thing in her pocket, the way she'd pocketed the ink. One more question, and then I'll go. This folder the agency gave me. The first page, the handwriting. Who wrote it? Every trace of warmth left the room at once, as if a vent had opened. Where did you get that? Julian said, very quietly. That was worse than loud, she would learn. The quiet was where he kept the things that could still hurt him. The agency. This morning. They said it was your candidate profile. Maren held the folder out, open to the soft, slanted lines. It's not, is it? Somebody sent you a page that wasn't meant for me. I'll give it back. I only asked because it doesn't read like an instruction. It reads like a letter. Julian crossed the room in 4 strides and took the folder from her hands, and for 1 second his fingers brushed hers, and both of them registered it, and neither of them moved, and the July light came sideways off the towers and lay for a moment across the paper like something spilled. He looked down at the handwriting. Whatever was in his face then, he turned away before she could name it. This was not supposed to leave the residence, he said, to the window. Then, it's real. It's someone's. It was my wife's. The word came out of him, rusted, unused, a hinge no one had oiled in years. Eleanor, she's been gone 9 years. She left. He stopped. His thumb moved once across the top line, across be patient with him, the way a person tests whether a wound has closed. She left instructions. For the people who would have to manage me after. She didn't trust me to be manageable. She was correct. The cooled air hummed. Down on the avenue the siren was long gone, and the horns had settled into the ordinary music of a hot afternoon. And up here a man in a charcoal suit stood holding his wife's handwriting, as though it were the last warm thing in a very cold building. 9 years, Marin said, gently, not pitying, only true. And the folder found me on my first morning. An error at the agency. Nothing found anyone. He set the folder down and squared it to the desk's edge, half an inch, the tightness leaving his shoulders as it did. You start Monday, Miss Kelly. Forget the handwriting. It has nothing to do with the job. But Marin had spent 6 years learning to read what people said with their hands while their mouths said something else, and she had watched his thumb go to that one line. Be patient with him, like a compass swinging north. She was almost to the door when she stopped. There were more pages, she said. Weren't there? The agency photocopied one. But that's page 1 of a list. She left you a list of rules. Julian did not answer. Out on the floor, the analysts had given up all pretense and were watching openly now, 30 faces turned toward the glass, because in 9 years no one had made him go this still. Monday, he said again. It was not agreement, and it was not denial. It was a door, closing gently, on a room she had already seen inside. Marin walked out past Mrs. Okafor, who took one look at her face and set down the watering can she'd been pretending to use. You're not running, Mrs. Okafor observed. Interesting. 4 of them ran. Number 2 took the stairs. He said he hasn't slept a full night in 9 years. Marin pressed the elevator button. Her thumb was still faintly blue with lobby ink. And there's a folder of rules his wife left him before she was gone. A whole list, and I've only seen the first line. And the first line is her asking a stranger to be kind to him. She looked at the older woman. Mrs. Okafor, what happens on the 19th? For a long moment the housekeeper said nothing. The elevator arrived, its doors opening on that cold citrus smell, and still she said nothing, and the silence had the weight of the whole floor in it. Come back Monday, Mrs. Okafor said finally, and last longer than the others, and maybe one day I'll be the one to tell you. Or maybe you'll be the one who finds out where he keeps the rest of that list, because he's read it 1,000 times and obeyed not one word of it, and it is eating him alive from the inside, like damp in a wall. She put her dry, warm hand over Marin's for just a second. Go home. Sleep. On Monday, the real work starts. And it isn't the phones. The doors closed. The car dropped 41 floors toward the roasting street, and Marin Kelly stood alone with the smell of citrus and the memory of a man's thumb moving across 4 soft words, and knew, the way you know weather, that she was not going to be the 6th to leave. Above her, in the cooled and gleaming quiet, Julian Ashford opened the bottom drawer of his desk, took out a worn leather notebook he had not let another living soul touch in 9 years, and held it without opening it, while the old clock counted down the last hours before Monday, and before the calendar turned, at the end of that week, to a date he had spent 9 years refusing to survive out loud. Monday came in on a wave of heat that had built over the weekend and broken nowhere, so the city arrived at work already damp at the collar. Marin got to the lobby at 7:40, signed the log again in full, and rode up through the citrus cold air with a paper cup of coffee she had bought on the corner, because she'd decided she would not start her first morning drinking his. Mrs. Okafor was waiting on 41, with a set of keys and a face that gave nothing away. You came back, the housekeeper said. I owe the doorman $20. He had you leaving by Wednesday. Tell him Friday at least. Marin looked at the empty desk outside the glass office. The 6th desk, cleared of 5 predecessors, its surface polished to a mirror. Is he in? He's been in since 5. He doesn't sleep, so he punishes the building for it. Mrs. Okafor handed over the keys one at a time, naming each. Floor, supply room. His car, in case you ever have to send it somewhere without him, which you won't. And this one, she held up a small brass key, older than the others. Its teeth worn soft, opens nothing you'll need. It opens the residence upstairs. He gave it to the last 5, and none of them ever used it. I'd keep it in your pocket and forget it's there, like the wall around the block. You listen. Good, most of them only heard themselves. Mrs. Okafor's eyes flicked toward the glass. One thing before he comes out. There's a man who'll turn up this week, tall, silver at the temples, smiles like a brochure. His name is Whit Calloway. He sits on the board and he's Mrs. Ashford's brother, which he mentions inside 4 minutes of any conversation. When he comes, you take his coat, you offer him nothing, and you tell Mr. Ashford the second he's in the building. Do you understand me? The second. Why? Because the last time Whit Calloway got 20 minutes alone with an assistant, we lost number 2. The kettle behind her had begun to tick as it heated. He's very charming. Charming is just cruelty that learned manners. Go put your bag down. Your first call's at 9, and it's a bad one. The morning moved the way Maren liked mornings to move. Full, fast, no time to be watched. She answered the phone in a voice that gave callers nothing to push against. She learned the shape of his calendar, its brutal density, the way Julian scheduled himself in 15-minute blocks from 6 in the morning until 9 at night, as though empty time were a predator. And there, recurring, ringed in a grey he used for nothing else, was the block. Every 19th. 2 in the afternoon until end of day. No title. No location. Just a smear of pale grey across the whole back half of the date. And, this month, it fell on Friday. She built her wall around it. She did not look at it again. That was harder than it sounded. The way a locked room in your own house is harder not to think about than a locked room in someone else's. At 11 he called her in. Not on the phone. He opened the glass door himself, which Mrs. Okafor would later tell her he had not done for an assistant in 2 years. You rescheduled the Hensley call, he said. I moved it 40 minutes. Mr. Hensley's flight was delayed out of Denver. I checked the airline before he could use it as leverage. He thinks you did him a favor. You didn't. You did yourself one. Something that was not quite approval crossed his face. Danielle used to argue with me about Hensley. Danielle isn't here. Maren set a fresh folder on his desk, squared it to the edge without thinking, and caught herself doing it, and saw him catch it too. Your lunch is at 12:30. It's a working lunch, so I ordered you something you can eat with one hand while you pretend to listen. You're welcome. I didn't say thank you. You will by Thursday, she said, and left before he could decide whether to be annoyed, and behind her, she was almost sure, she heard something that in a warmer man would have been the front edge of a laugh. It did not last the day. Nothing warm in that building lasted the day. Whit Calloway arrived at 4, exactly as Mrs. Okafor had drawn him. Tall, silver at the temples, a summer weight suit the color of good sand, a smile that arrived a half second before the rest of his face. He came off the elevator already talking, already a friend of everyone, and he set both hands flat on Maren's new desk and leaned in as though they were old accomplices. You must be the 6th, he said warmly. I do admire stamina. Whit Calloway, I'm family, technically. Eleanor was my sister. This whole glass mausoleum was half hers. Once you have a kind face. The others had frightened faces. That never ends well in here. Mr. Calloway. Maren stood, because sitting under him felt like being weather. May I take your coat? No coat. It's July, my dear. Look at you. You're melting and pretending not to. He glanced at the glass office, where Julian stood with his back turned, on a call. How is he? Between us. He won't tell me, and Mrs. Okafor tells me lies with such a straight face I've stopped asking. Is he sleeping? Eating? Does he still sit in the dark on the... He stopped himself, but not before the word had almost come out, and Maren watched him choose not to finish it, and understood that Whit Calloway knew about the 19th. Knew, and wanted her to know he knew, and wanted, most of all, to find out how much she'd been told. "Mr. Ashford is well," she said. "I'll let him know you're here. He asks that visitors wait by thee." "He asks nothing of the kind. He never asks, he only refuses." Calloway's smile widened, and under it she saw the cruelty Mrs. Okafor had promised, patient and unhurried. "Let me tell you something useful, since you're new and you seem sensible. That man is going to spend one afternoon this week behind a locked door doing something no grown person should do alone, and he is going to call it grief and expect the rest of us to arrange the whole company around it. There's a board that owns 40% of this building. That board is tired of scheduling itself around a locked door. And you, my dear, are the person holding the calendar." He straightened, adjusted a cuff that did not need it. "I only think you should know what you're really guarding. It isn't his privacy. It's his wit." The word came from the glass doorway, and it was very quiet, and it emptied the air the way a change in pressure does before a storm you cannot yet see. Julian stood with one hand still on the door. He was not looking at Merrin. He was looking at the man at her desk with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not the frost, not the faraway grey. Something with a pulse in it. "Julian," Calloway spread his hands, all warmth, all welcome, as though he had been waiting in a parlour and not laying siege to a desk. "I was getting acquainted with your latest. She's a great improvement. I give her till, you give her nothing. She isn't yours to time." Julian came out onto the floor, and 30 analysts found urgent work on their screens. "You don't have a meeting today. You don't have a meeting this week. You came up here to stand at her desk and say the thing you always say, so let's save the afternoon. Say it to me." "All right." And Calloway's smile did not falter, which was the worst thing about it. "The board meets Friday. This Friday. 2 o'clock. I moved it myself. The summer schedule had a gap, and I filled it. We're voting on the Meridian acquisition and on the, let's call it the stewardship question. Whether a chairman who vanishes one afternoon a month is a chairman or a liability." He let that sit. 2 o'clock. Julian. Friday the 19th. I do hope you'll be in the room. It would look so strange if you weren't. Merrin felt the date land in the room like a stone drop down a well, and she saw, without looking directly, the exact moment Julian understood what had been done to him, the block and the vote laid over each other on purpose. The 1 hour in the month he could not give squared precisely against the 1 hour he could not miss. "You scheduled it on the 19th, Julian said. "Not a question. I scheduled it when the room was free." Calloway buttoned his jacket. "If the date's inconvenient, you're welcome to tell the board why. Stand up in front of all of us and explain what's so sacred about a Friday afternoon that it outranks the company Eleanor helped you build. I'd genuinely like to hear it. So would they." He turned to Merrin, and the brochure smile came back full force. "Lovely to meet you, 6th. Do last. He needs someone to, and it clearly isn't going to be him." He was gone into the elevator before either of them moved, and the doors closed on the citrus smell, and the whole floor let out a breath it had been holding for 4 minutes. Julian stood very still. His jaw had set at the hinge, hard, and his hand had closed at his side. "Cancel nothing on Friday," he said to no one, to the window, to himself. Then he went back into the glass office and shut the door, and through the wall Merrin watched him cross to the credenza and stand over the old clock as though it had personally betrayed him, and not touch it, and not touch anything, only stand. Mrs. Okafor materialized at her elbow with 2 cups of tea Merrin had not asked for. "You told him the second Calloway walked in," the housekeeper said. "You didn't. He saw the man from the glass. I was about to. Calloway is fast. Calloway is a flood. You don't outrun a flood, you get to higher ground." Mrs. Okafor pressed a cup into her hands. It was hot and sweet, and smelled of bergamot and something under it, honey gone slightly dark. "Now you know what Friday is. Half of it. The board wants him gone, has wanted it for 2 years, and Wits finally found the crowbar. If Julian misses that vote, they'll say he's not fit. If he makes it, he'll have to be in that room at 2 o'clock. And Julian Ashford has not been anywhere but one place at 2 o'clock on the 19th in 9 years. Where does he go? That, said Mrs. Okafor, is the wall you built this morning. I'm not the one who gets to take it down. She sipped her tea. But I'll tell you this much, because you'll need it to do your job, and not because you've earned it yet. Whit Calloway did not schedule that vote to win it. He scheduled it to make Julian choose out loud, company or the door he guards. Because Whit has spent 9 years wanting the whole building to see what he's decided the truth is. That Julian is not grieving. That he's hiding. And that the thing behind that locked afternoon is not what Julian says it is it? The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment, and the beaded chain on her glasses caught the low gold light coming sideways through the sealed windows. I've kept this residence 11 years, she said. I kept it while she was here. I've never once been told what he does on the 19th, and I have never once asked. And do you know why? Because some doors you leave shut, not because you're afraid of what's behind them, but because the person behind them has so little left that's only theirs. She set her cup down. Whit wants to kick that door in and call it accountability. Your job, if you want it to be more than answering phones, is to make sure he doesn't get to. She paused. The trouble is, I no longer know if the thing behind the door is keeping Julian alive or eating him hollow. And after 9 years, I'm not certain he knows either. That night, Maren did not sleep well, which annoyed her, because she prided herself on sleeping through other people's crises. She kept seeing the 2 o'clock, the way it had lain over the date twice, the way a man could be checkmated by a calendar. She kept hearing Calloway, the thing behind that locked afternoon is not what he says it is, and hating that a cruel man had planted a question in her she couldn't dig back out. She got to the office Tuesday before Mrs. Okafor. The floor was dark, except for the standing lamp in the glass office, and Julian was already there. Of course, jacket off, sleeves turned back, and on his desk, open, was the worn leather notebook. He didn't hear her at first. She stood at her own desk in the half-dark and watched him turn a page of it with one finger, slowly, reading a thing he plainly knew by heart, his mouth moving very slightly over the words, the way people's mouths move over prayers or old songs. Then he became aware of her, some animal sense for being watched, and closed the notebook flat under his palm, and the shutter came down over his face so fast she felt it as a small, cold draft. "You're early again," he said. "So are you. We're going to keep meeting like this at dawn and pretending it's normal." She hung up her bag. "I brought you a coffee this time. Black, from the corner, not the machine. Because the machine tastes like the inside of a filing cabinet, and you deserve slightly better on a Tuesday." He looked at the cup she set on his desk, as though it were a small, unexploded thing. "Why, because you told me a true thing on Friday, and I've decided the appropriate response to a true thing is coffee." She stayed on her side of the desk. "That's the list, isn't it? In the notebook. The rest of her rules." His hand flattened on the leather. "This has nothing to do with the job. Everything on this floor has to do with the job, because the job is you, and you're not sleeping, and on Friday a man who smiles like a brochure is going to try to take your company away from you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at exactly the hour you can't be in the room." She kept her voice level, no pity in it, only the flat plain warmth of a woman stating weather. "I'm not asking what's behind the door. I promised I wouldn't, and I keep promises even when they're inconvenient, which is most of the time. I'm asking one thing that is my business. Do you have a plan for Friday, or are you going to let him do this to you?" Julian was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the July dawn was coming up grey gold over the towers, and the sealed glass held it out at arm's length, and the old clock ticked. "There is no plan," he said finally. "There has never needed to be one. Every 19th for 9 years, the world has arranged itself around that afternoon, because I arranged it. Marguerite arranged it. Danielle arranged it. That was the job you all did without knowing you were doing it. You kept the 19th empty, and you never asked why. And the not asking was the whole of the work. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the desk, aligning the seam of the lid to some private north. Whit has found the one thing I cannot move, and moved the company on top of it. That's not a schedule. That's a cage. He's been building it for 9 years and I let him, because moving the vote would mean explaining the afternoon, and I would rather lose the building. Then, lose the vote, Marin said. Don't lose the building. There's a difference, and you're smart enough to see it. Send someone. Send me. He looked up sharply. Give me your proxy, she went on, before the shutter could finish coming down. Give me the meridian numbers and a single sheet of what you want said, and I'll sit in that room at 2 o'clock, and I'll be so boring and so competent that the board falls asleep and votes your way out of sheer relief. And you can be wherever you need to be. And Whit Calloway can smile at an empty chair all afternoon and get nothing for it. She let it land. You don't have to choose between the door and the company. You just have to trust one person to hold one room for 1 hour. That's all Friday actually is, if you take the cruelty out of it. Something happened in Julian's face then that she had not seen before and would spend the rest of the week trying to understand. A kind of pain that was almost relief. The specific ache of a man being offered a door out of a room he'd forgotten had one. I don't give proxies, he said. I've never given a proxy in my life. You've also never had a 6th assistant last past Monday, so this is a week for firsts. She almost smiled, and didn't, because the moment was too thin for it. You don't have to decide now. You have until Friday. But Julian, it was the first time she'd used his name, and she watched it land on him. Decide before Thursday night. Because if you leave it to Friday morning, he'll have already told the board you didn't have the nerve to show. And once a story like that is loose in a room, you can't ever fully call it back. He said nothing, but he did not tell her to leave, and he did not put the notebook back in the drawer. And when she went to her desk and began the day's calls, she was aware of him through the glass, sitting with his wife's list under one hand and her paper coffee cooling under the other, looking at the grey block on Friday as if for the first time he were measuring it against something that might weigh more. At noon, the trouble that had been waiting all week finally arrived, and it did not come from Whit Calloway. Mrs. Okafor came down from the residence with her mouth in a hard line and an envelope in her hand, and she did not stop at the tea station. This was in the residence mail, she said, low, setting it on Marin's desk. Hand delivered, not posted. No stamp. It's addressed to you. Marin looked at it. Her name, Miss M. Kelly, in a small, precise hand she didn't recognize, and under it, underlined once, regarding the 19th. She felt the floor tilt very slightly, the ladder feeling, the drop in the stomach. Whit, she said. Whit doesn't write his own letters, and Whit doesn't know what's behind that door any more than I do. He only knows there's a door. Mrs. Okafor's voice had dropped to almost nothing. That hand isn't his. I've seen his hand on 40 birthday cards. That's not it. She glanced at the glass office, where Julian was on his feet now, watching them through the wall, having registered. The way he registered everything, that something had changed in the temperature of his floor. Open it in the supply room, not here. And Marin. The old warm hand closed hard over hers. Harder than Friday. Urgent. Whatever it says, you tell him. You do not do what the last one did and try to protect him by keeping it from him. Number 2 thought she was protecting him. That's how Whit got his crowbar the first time. Secrets in this building don't stay small. They marry each other in the dark and have children. Marin picked up the envelope. Through the glass, Julian's grey eyes were fixed on it, and on her, and she saw him mouth a single word she couldn't hear through the wall, but understood anyway. Who? And she found she did not yet have an answer. Only the thin, cold certainty, sharp as the citrus in the air. that whoever had written her name had been inside the residence to leave it, and that the door she'd promised never to open had just, from the other side, begun to knock. The supply room smelled of toner and cold paper and the faint peppermint of someone else's tea gone to dust in a drawer. Merrin shut the door with her hip, put her back against the shelving, and turned the envelope over once in the fluorescent hum before she opened it, because her mother had taught her that the way a thing was sealed told you as much as the words inside. It was not sealed with tape. It was tucked, the flap folded in. The way you close a note you mean a person to open and no machine to inspect. Inside were 2 pages. The first she recognized before she'd read a word. The soft, quick loops. The slant that leaned toward you like a woman turning to catch what you said. Eleanor's hand. Another photocopy. The grey shadow of a fold running down its middle, and near the top, underlined once, a rule further down the list than the one she had already seen. Do not let him keep the 19th alone, however he insists, and he will insist, and he will be wrong, and you must be stubborn where I could not. Merrin read it twice. The second page was different. Smaller writing. Precise. Upright. Pressed hard enough to dent the paper. A hand that had nothing warm in it at all. Miss Kelly, you are new, which means no one has yet taught you to lie for him. Good, before Friday. Ask Mr. Ashford what he carries up to the residence on the 19th, and which door he stands outside and cannot bring himself to open. He has read Eleanor's list 1,000 times and honored not one line of it. A company deserves a chairman, not a man frozen in a hallway. If he will not tell you, he will tell the board, or I will. I was there when she left him the list. I am still here. There was no name. Only, beneath, 3 letters that were not initials but a word, small and deliberate, kept. The strip light buzzed. Somewhere in the wall a pipe ticked as the cooling system pushed its museum air through the building's veins, and Merrin realized her thumb had gone to the corner of the page and pressed. The old ink habit, the need to leave a mark on a thing that frightened her. A room. A door in the residence he stood outside and could not open. She thought of the brass key in her pocket, the one Mrs. Okafor had said opened nothing she'd need, and felt the cold citrus air move against the back of her neck, though no door had opened. That's not a threat, she said aloud, to the shelves, to steady herself with the sound of a voice. That's a threat wearing a helpful coat. Because it was both, and that was the trouble. The letter wanted her to break her one promise, to open the door she'd sworn to build a wall around, and it had dressed the wanting up as concern for a man's company. Wit's shape was all over it. And yet the hand wasn't Wit's, Mrs. Okafor had staked her 40 birthday cards on that, and Merrin believed her. Someone else, then. Someone who had been inside the residence to leave this, who had watched Eleanor write the list, who signed themselves not with a name, but with the fact of having stayed. She folded the pages back along their creases, the way they'd come, and stood a moment with the envelope pressed flat to her chest exactly as she'd held the folder in the lobby 3 days and a whole lifetime ago. She could keep it from him. Number 2 had kept things from him, and Mrs. Okafor had said that was how Wit got his crowbar the first time. She could take it to Wit and trade it, which was surely what the letter half hoped, and be paid in the currency of being on the winning side. Or she could do the plain, stupid, unprotected thing that had gotten her through 6 years of other people's worst days, carry the true thing to the person it belonged to, and let it cost what it cost. The door opened. Mrs. Okafor stood there, with 2 cups she had not been asked for, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair, her face doing the thing it did when it had already decided something, and was waiting for you to catch up. "You've read it," she said. "You've gone the color of the walls. Sit down before you meet the floor like number 3. I'm not going to faint." Merrin took the tea because refusing Mrs. Okafor's tea was, she was learning, a thing you did once. There's a second rule. And a note. From someone who signs themselves, kept, who says they were there when Eleanor left him the list, and that they're still here. She watched the older woman's face. Who's still here, Mrs. Okafor? After 9 years. Who stayed? And for the first time since the lobby, Mrs. Okafor's certainty flickered, a hairline, there and gone, like the shadow that crossed Julian's face when a sentence got too near the door. Drink your tea, she said, and then go and tell him. Now, before Wit's cleverness has time to grow a second head. Julian was standing over the credenza when she came in, not touching the old clock, only presiding over it, and he turned before she'd shut the glass door, because he had that sense for a change in the weather of his own floor. You went to the supply room white, and you've come back white, he said. So it's real. Say it plainly. I don't have the patience today for the version that spares me. Maren set the 2 pages on his desk, squared to the edge without thinking, and this time neither of them remarked on it. A letter. Hand delivered to the residence, addressed to me. No stamp. She kept her hands where he could see them, the way you did in a room where trust had thin walls. 2 pages. One is another rule in your wife's hand. The other is from someone who wants me to make you say, before Friday, what you do on the 19th. They say if you won't tell me, you'll tell the board, or they will. She watched him read. She had thought she knew the shapes his face could make. The frost, the faraway grey, the small hardening at the hinge of the jaw. This was none of them. This was the look of a man watching a hand he loved appear on a page carried into a room where it had no business being. And under it, rising, something that was not grief at all. Where did you get this? He said. Quiet. The bad quiet. I told you. The residence mail. Mrs. Okafor brought it down not 10 minutes. You had the first page on Friday. He set the letter down, very precisely, and when he lifted his eyes they had gone flat and pale and hunting. You walked in here on your first morning with Eleanor's handwriting in a folder no agency should have owned, and you asked me, who wrote it, as though you didn't know. And now, 4 days later, a second page arrives with your name on it. Yours, not Danielle's, not Mrs. Okafor's. Yours. His voice did not rise. That was the worst of it. Tell me how that looks from where I stand. Maren felt the accusation land in her chest, cold and exact. It looks bad. It looks arranged. It looks bad because it was arranged by someone to look exactly like this so that you do what you're doing right now. She stayed on her side of the desk. She did not step back, and she did not step forward, because both would have been answers to a question he hadn't earned the right to ask. Whit told me on Tuesday you'd spend one afternoon this week behind a locked door. He wants the whole building to see you choose. Someone just handed you a reason to fire the one person who offered to sit in that boardroom in your place. Ask yourself who that serves. It isn't me. I don't get anything out of you distrusting me except a shorter contract than the other 5. His jaw was set at the hinge, hard as the marble in the lobby. You brought it to me, he said, and it wasn't gratitude. It was evidence being weighed. Number 2 didn't. Number 2 decided what I could survive knowing, and kept it in a drawer, and it cost me a board seat. So which is the performance, Miss Kelly? The loyal one who tells me everything, or the plant who tells me everything so I'll trust the plant? I don't know how to prove a thing by not doing it, she said. That's the whole trap of being accused. If I'd hidden it, that would be proof. I bring it to you, and that's proof too. There's no version of a clean-handed person that doesn't look guilty to a man who's decided the whole world is Whit Calloway wearing different coats. She kept her voice level. No pity, no plea, only the flat plain weather of it. I made you one promise. I'd build a wall around the 19th and forget the wall was there. I've kept it. I still haven't opened that door, and I'm not going to. Not for Whit, not for a letter, not for you if you asked me. Because a promise you only keep when it's easy isn't one. That's the only proof I've got. It isn't enough. I know it isn't enough. The old clock ticked into the space between them. Julian looked down at the 2 pages, his wife's soft loops and the stranger's hard, upright hand lying side by side on his desk like 2 different centuries, and something in him that had been braced for 9 years shifted a half-inch and did not settle back. "Get out," he said, not loud. "Go home. I'll decide by tomorrow whether you have a job. Julian, you used my name on Tuesday, and it worked, so you've kept it. That's the sort of thing a clever person does." But the flatness had cracked, just slightly, on the last word, and she understood that the cruelty in the room was not aimed at her. It was the sound a man makes when the one door he keeps sealed has begun, from the inside, to knock. And he cannot tell the knock from a trick. "Go home, Miss Kelly," she went. She did not slam the glass, you couldn't. The hinge sighed no matter how you left, and she walked past the 30 analysts who had stopped pretending, past Mrs. Okafor's watchful stillness, into the citrus-cold elevator, and she pressed her thumb to nothing at all, and rode down through the sealed and gleaming quiet, with her promise intact, and her contract, quite possibly, in ashes. She did not go home. She got out at the lobby, walked once around the block through the wet July heat, until her blouse stuck to her spine, and the smell of asphalt and cut grass and roasting nuts had scrubbed the citrus out of her lungs. And then she came back, signed the log a 3rd time in full, and rode up to the residence floor instead of the office. Because Mrs. Okafor had a kettle and a memory, and Maren had run out of people who owed her the truth. The residence was cooler even than the office, and softer, a world of pale stone and long linen the color of unbleached bone, and it smelled, faintly, under the same cold citrus the whole building wore like a uniform, of beeswax and old paper, and something floral gone to memory. Mrs. Okafor was at the long window with a watering can she was actually using this time, tending a row of white geraniums that had no business thriving in a house that never opened a window. "He sent you down," she said, without turning. I felt the lift go. "He's decided your wits, hasn't he? He does that. It's the Frost's oldest trick, when a person gets close enough to matter. Find the reason they're a danger, and you never have to risk the thaw. He's deciding overnight whether I still work here." Maren came and stood beside her at the glass. 41 floors down the avenue shimmered, and the geraniums were very white against all that far-off gold. Mrs. Okafor. The letter. Someone signed it kept. As a word, not a name. Someone who says they were here when Eleanor wrote the list, and who says there's a door in this residence he stands outside on the 19th and can't open. A door even you can't go through. She turned. "You told me you'd never been told what he does that afternoon. You didn't tell me there was a room up here you're locked out of. The watering can stilled. Water beaded on a white petal and hung. There's a room," Mrs. Okafor said, at last, in a voice Maren hadn't heard from her. No dryness in it, no armor. At the end of the east hall. It was hers. Her study, her books, the little desk where she wrote, that list, and 40 other kindnesses this building never deserved. After she was gone, he had every other room in this residence changed. Knew everything. As though the past were a stain he could send out to be cleaned. But that room he sealed. New lock, 1 key, and the key never leaves him. Not the brass one in your pocket that opens the residence, the front of it, the part I keep. That room he keeps. I've dusted the whole of this apartment for 9 years, and I have never once been inside those walls. And I have stopped, mostly, minding. Her hand tightened on the can. And now a stranger who signs themselves kept knows about it. Which means one of 2 things, and I don't like either. Either someone has been up here who shouldn't have been, or the person who wrote that letter isn't a stranger at all. Who was here at the end? Maren asked, quietly, when she wrote the list. Who else was in this apartment then? Mrs. Okafor set the watering can down on the sill with a small deliberate click. There was a woman, she said. A nurse. No, that's not the right word, and I'll not use the wrong one, because the wrong word is how wit builds his stories. A companion. Eleanor was well, and then over a summer she was less well, and there was a woman who came to sit with her in the long afternoons and read to her, and take down what she wanted written. Because toward the end, Eleanor's hands would not always do as she asked. A patient soul, Miss Ackley, sister. Some called her, though she wasn't clergy, only the kind of steady you'd want in the room. She was there the day Eleanor made him promise to let strangers manage him. She'd have seen the list written. She'd have known there were pages. Mrs. Okafor's mouth thinned. She left the day after Eleanor did. Went north. I always understood. I sent a card the first Christmas, and it came back. Kept, Marin said. A woman who kept vigil. Who kept the record? Who kept... Yes, Mrs. Okafor looked suddenly older, and the low gold light off the towers found the beaded chain on her glasses and made a small constellation of it. But that was 9 years ago, and cards came back, and if it's her, then the question isn't only what she wants. It's why now? Why this summer? Why the same week Whit Calloway finally found his crowbar? She met Marin's eyes. Two things that were quiet for 9 years do not both start knocking in the same week by accident. Marin. Someone put them in the same week. And whoever did that has been closer to us than any of us noticed. Wednesday came in hotter still, the air outside gone thick enough to lean on, and Marin went to work not knowing if she had a job, which she decided was better than not going, and definitely not having one. Julian's glass office was empty. His jacket was gone from the back of the chair. The worn leather notebook was gone from the desk. And ringed on the calendar in the grey he used for nothing else, Wednesday held a block she had never seen him keep before. 9 to 11. No title, which meant the man who scheduled himself in 15-minute cages against the predator of empty time had gone somewhere he did not want written down, 2 days before the 19th. He's upstairs, Mrs. Okafor said, arriving with tea. In the residence. He's been standing at the end of the East Hall since 7. Not going in. Just standing. The way he does on the day itself, except it isn't the day yet. She set the cup down. He asked me a question this morning I haven't heard him ask in 9 years. He asked whether I trusted you. Marin's throat did something inconvenient. What did you tell him? I told him I trusted you more than I trust him, which isn't a compliment to you so much as an insult to him, but he took the point. She almost smiled. You still have a job. He didn't say so. He wouldn't. But the letter's still on his desk, both pages, and he's had 2 days to burn them, and he hasn't. A man doesn't keep the evidence against you, unless some part of him is hoping to be talked out of the verdict. The elevator chimed. Whit Calloway came off it into the office, as though onto a stage. Sand-colored suit, silver at the temples, the smile arriving its customary half-second early. And today, he carried a slim leather folio under one arm, and the look of a man holding 4 aces face down. 6th. He said warmly, as though delighted to find her still occupying the earth. You lasted the week. I've lost a private wager to a doorman, and I couldn't be happier about it. Is he in? He glanced at the empty glass office and answered himself. No, he's up in his mausoleum practicing for Friday. Doesn't matter. It's you I came to see. Mr. Calloway, Marin stood. He asked that visitors... He asks nothing. We've been through this. He set the folio on her desk and opened it with 2 fingers, unhurried, and turned it to face her. Inside was a single sheet, a board resolution, the letterhead severe, 3 signatures already dry along the bottom. A courtesy. Because I like you, and because I think you're the only person in this glass tower with the sense to do arithmetic. Read the amended language. 2nd paragraph. Marin read it. The cold citrus air seemed to thicken. The stewardship question, she read aloud, slowly, given its bearing on the confidence of the board, shall be determined by the chairman in person, and shall not be delegated by proxy, letter, or representative. She looked up. You closed the door. I closed the door. Whit agreed, pleasantly. You offered him a clever little escape. Sit in the room yourself. Be dull. Hold the hour. Danielle would never have thought of it. You're a genuine improvement, truly. So I took it away. The Meridian vote he can send his proxy to. Nobody cares about Meridian. But the question of whether the man is fit to lead, that he answers standing up, in the room, at 2 o'clock on Friday, with his own mouth. Or he doesn't answer, and the board draws the only conclusion left to draw. He tapped the page. I don't need to win a vote, you see. I've never needed the vote. I need him to choose out loud. The room or the door. 9 years I've watched him arrange the whole world around a locked afternoon and call it grief, and Friday the world stops arranging itself. And everyone finally sees what I've always seen. And what's that? Marin said. Flat. Witt's smile did not falter, and that was the cruelty of it. Patient and unhurried, and sure. That my sister's list is being used as a shrine by a man who won't obey a word of it, he said softly. She left him instructions to live, to let people in, to not keep the 19th alone. I've read them. Did he tell you I've read them? I have. There are pages he doesn't know I've seen, and every single rule he's broken by doing the opposite, sealing the door, keeping the vigil, turning her kindness into a cage, and himself into the jailer. That's not honoring her, my dear. That's using her memory to excuse a man who stopped living the day she stopped. He closed the folio. I'm not the villain of this. I'm the only one who wants him back in the world. Ask him what's behind that door, and when he won't tell you, you'll understand which of us actually loved her. He straightened his cuff. 2 o'clock Friday. In the room. Or not, and he was gone into the citrus cold lift before Marin had drawn the breath to answer, leaving the folio, and the 3 dry signatures, and the small poison of a question she couldn't spit back out. What if the cruel man is right? She found Julian in the residence at the end of the East Hall, exactly where Mrs. Okafor had left him, a tall, dark shape against the pale stone, the notebook in one hand, and the other flat on the sealed door, as though he could feel a pulse through it. He did not turn. Beyond the long windows the July evening had gone to bronze, and the whole apartment smelled of beeswax and geraniums, and the far faint sweetness of a summer that never reached the sealed rooms. You're still employed, he said. In case you came up to ask, I came up because Witt was just downstairs closing the last door you had. She stopped a respectful distance behind him and told him, plainly, all of it, the amended resolution, the 3 signatures, the proxy escape hatch nailed shut, the 2 o'clock that could no longer be sent a representative. She watched his shoulders take it. He says you've broken every rule she left you. He says the door is the proof. He says whoever loves her would want you out here, in the world, not standing in a hallway you can't walk through. For a long moment Julian said nothing. His thumb moved once across the cover of the notebook. Across nothing, the way it moved across the top line of the list. He's read pages I never showed him, Julian said finally. Lo. Did he tell you that? He has copies. He's had them for years, and he's kept them the way you keep a debt you mean to call in on the right afternoon. He turned, at last, and his pale grey eyes were not far away now. They were terribly present, and that was worse. You want to know the joke of it, Ms. Kelly, the thing that would finish Witt, if he ever understood it. He's right. Every rule on that list, I've done the opposite. She wrote let people in, and I emptied the building of everyone who tried. She wrote, do not keep the 19th alone, and I have kept 9 years of them alone behind that door. She wrote, be kinder to yourself than the world was to her. And look at me. A breath. Unsteady. He thinks I've made her a shrine. I've made her a sentence, and I have kept it, word for word, by doing precisely what she begged me not to. Then stop, Marin said, and her voice was not level now. It had warmth in it, and the warmth was dangerous, and she let it be. Not for the board. Not for Witt. Open the door with someone in the hall who's decided not to run. You keep the vigil alone, because you've told yourself alone is the honest way to grieve. But she didn't ask you to grieve honestly. She asked you not to do it by yourself. She took one step closer, and the beeswax and the geranium and the sealed-in sweetness of the summer wrapped the two of them at the end of the pale stone hall. Let me stand here Friday. Not in the room instead of you. Wits nailed that shut. Fine. Let him have his empty gesture. Let me stand here, on this side of that door, while you're on the other side of it. And then whatever the board decides at 2 o'clock, they'll have decided about a man who finally kept one rule, instead of the whole broken list. Something moved through Julian's face then, the pain that was almost relief. The ache of a man being handed a door out of a room he'd forgotten had one. And for one suspended second in the bronze light, she thought he would say yes. Would put the worn key in the sealed lock and let another living soul stand at the threshold of the room he had kept for 9 years alone. Then the phone in her pocket buzzed, and his in his jacket, at the same instant, the way two things that were meant to arrive together always did, and Mrs. Okafor's voice was in her ear before she'd fully lifted it, stripped of every ounce of dryness, urgent as Merrin had never heard her. The residence log, Mrs. Okafor said. Merrin, I've just pulled the residence entry log, the one nobody ever reads, and there's a name on it. Monday night. 9:40. Someone signed into this apartment and back out again 11 minutes later, and it's the 11 minutes the letter was left, and the name. A breath. The name is Ackley. She's here. She's in the city. She signed her own name as bold as morning, which means she wants us to know, which means Friday was never Whit's afternoon at all. It's hers. And Julian, who had not moved, who was still holding the notebook against the sealed door of the room he had kept alone for 9 years, said into the sudden stillness of the bronze-lit hall, in a voice gone entirely without colour, Ackley, as though the single word had reached back 9 years and taken hold of him by the throat, and Merrin watched the door he had almost agreed to open seal itself shut again behind his eyes, and understood that whatever waited on the far side of Friday, there would be no standing quietly in a hallway now, and no proxy, and no clever dull hour that saved him. There was only the woman who had kept the record, and the room, and 2 o'clock, and a man who had just remembered he had one more secret than even his own housekeeper knew. Ackley, Julian said again, and the name came out of him like something pulled up on a chain, cold and streaming. Maren lowered her phone. Beyond the long windows, the July evening had finished burning down to that deep bronze that meant the heat would not break tonight either, and the white geraniums on the sill glowed against it, and the sealed door at the end of the east hall stood exactly as it had for 9 years. Pale, blank, one worn lock, and a man's hand flat against it. You know her, she said. I knew her for one summer. His voice had gone very level, which she had learned to distrust more than shouting. She sat with Eleanor in the afternoons when Eleanor's hands stopped doing as they were told. She read to her. She took down what Eleanor wanted written, because near the end my wife could think a sentence perfectly and not hold the pen to make it. His thumb moved once on the leather cover. She was the last person besides me to hear Eleanor's voice, with the door open. And the morning after everything, she was gone north before I was fully awake, and I let her go, because I could not stand the sight of the one witness who had watched me be too much of a coward to sit in that room and hold the pen for my own wife. Julian, don't. Not cruel. Only closing. She has been in this city for how long, do you think, before she signed her name as bold as morning on my own residence log? Long enough to slip Eleanor's handwriting into an agency folder and watch which candidate carried it up. Long enough to wait and see if the 6th one stayed past Monday. He turned from the door at last, and his pale grey eyes found Marin's, and there was something terrible working under the frost. Not anger at her, she understood, but the vertigo of a man realizing he had been arranged. You didn't find those rules by accident, Miss Kelly. Someone posted you to me like a letter. The cooled air hummed. Somewhere below, the whole floor of Ashford Holdings had emptied into the summer dusk, and up here there was only the two of them, and the geraniums, and the smell of beeswax, and old paper thick as memory. Then she wanted you found, Maren said. Not caught. Found. A person who wanted to hurt you doesn't spend 9 years waiting for you to let one human being stand close enough to matter. She waited for the thaw, Julian. She waited so long she gave up on you doing it yourself and mailed you the thaw in a folder. She took a breath. The question isn't whether you were arranged. You were. The question is what she's carried around for 9 years that she thinks belongs behind that door, and why she's decided this is the week you finally get it. Because of Whit. His jaw set at the hinge. The vote is public. If Whit is moving to strip me on the 19th, then anyone watching the company from the outside would know the date has come. She read it in a filing, or a rumor, and she decided the truth had to reach me before Whit could turn it into a weapon on a boardroom floor. He said it slowly, as though building the thing while he looked at it. They both chose the 19th. He to make me choose the room over the door. She to make me open the door before he could describe what's behind it in his own words. So you have 2 days, Maren said, and one of them thinks she's saving you, and one of them knows he's finishing you, and neither of them is going to ask what you want. She held his eyes. I'm asking. What do you want, Julian? Behind everything Whit's built, and everything she's carried, the one plain thing. What do you want to happen at 2 o'clock on Friday? For a moment he did not answer. His hand had gone back to the door without his seeming to notice, the way a tongue goes to a missing tooth. I want to go in, he said, so quietly she felt it more than heard it. For 9 years, every 19th, I have carried her flower up this hall and stood exactly here, and I have wanted to go in, and I have not been able to make my hand turn the key. A breath. She made me promise one thing at the end, Ms. Kelly, and it is the only promise I have not kept, and it is the promise that has kept me standing in a hallway ever since, and I have never told a living soul what it was. Not Mrs. Okafor, not the 5 before you. His eyes came up, raw, and I think Sister Ackley is the only other person alive who knows it, because she wrote it down. The bronze light lay across the sealed door like something spilled, and Maren, who had promised on her first morning to build a wall around this exact place, and forget the wall was there, understood that the wall was coming down on Friday, whether anyone opened the door or not, and that the only mercy left was in who stood beside him when it did. Then, let me be in the hall, she said. That's all, not in the room downstairs. Here, he did not say no. He picked up the worn leather notebook, and he looked at the door a moment longer, and then he walked her back through the pale linen quiet of the residence to the lift, and neither of them said another word, and both of them knew Friday had already begun. Friday came in white with heat, the sky over the towers gone the color of bone, and the city moved slow and damp beneath it, as though the whole avenue were wading. Maren signed the lobby log at 7 in full, and her hand was not quite steady, and she pressed her thumb to the wet ink, and this time did not wipe it off. Mrs. Okafor met her on 41 with no tea at all, which frightened her more than anything Whit had ever said. He's upstairs already, the housekeeper said. He went up at 5 with the flower. He hasn't come down. The board convenes in the 14th floor room at 2, and Whit has been telephoning since 6 to make certain everyone knows the chairman may not appear. Her hands, for once, were doing nothing, folded hard in front of her. And there's a woman in the lobby, Maren. She came at 7:30 and gave her name and asked to be told when it was time. I went down myself to look at her. Mrs. Okafor's voice thinned. 9 years older and northern weathered and upright as a fence post, and she looked at me, and she said, "Hello, Grace. You kept the geraniums. She'd be glad. And I have not been called Grace in this building by anyone since Eleanor." She pressed her lips flat. It's her. It's Ackley. Where is she now? Sitting in the lobby, with her hands in her lap, like a woman who has waited 9 years and can wait 1 more hour. Mrs. Okafor caught Maren's sleeve. "Whatever she's come to say, you make sure it's said to him, and not at him. Do you understand me? That door has been shut so long, the whole building has organized itself around the shut of it. When it opens, everything falls the way it's leaning. Make sure it falls toward him, and not on him. I'll try." Trying is what the other 5 did. But the old dryness came back into her, just a thread of it, steadying them both. "Go up. He asked for you at 6. He's never asked for anyone at 6. Take him a coffee from the corner. Black. He'll pretend he doesn't want it, and he'll drink the whole thing." She almost smiled. "That's the only order I've got for you today. And it's a good one." Maren went down and out into the wall of heat and bought the coffee from the corner cart, the paper cup sweating in her hand before she reached the doors, and she rode up through the citrus-cold air to the residence, with the smell of hot pavement and cut grass still in her clothes. She found Julian exactly where she had left him in her mind all night, at the end of the East Hall, in shirt-sleeves, the notebook in one hand and a single white geranium and a small glass of water in the other, standing before the sealed door. "You brought coffee," he said, without turning. "From the corner. Not the machine. You deserve slightly better on a Friday." She set the cup on the narrow console beside him. "Whit's been calling everyone since 6 to tell them you might not show. Ackley's in the lobby. She asked to be told when it was time." His shoulders took each fact, the way a shore takes waves. Then he did turn, and he had not slept, that was plain, and the frost was all but gone from him, worn through to something underneath that she had never been allowed to see in daylight. "Do you want to know what the promise was?" he said. "It was not really a question. The one I broke every 19th for 9 years. Only if you want to say it. I have wanted to say it for 9 years and had no one I trusted to hold it." He looked down at the geranium, at the white petals trembling faintly in the recirculated cold. At the end, when her hands wouldn't work, Eleanor made Sister Ackley take down a last page. "She wouldn't let me read it," she said, his voice caught. "And he let it. Did not fight it," she said. "Not yet. Not alone. Promise me you won't read the last rule alone, Julian. Promise me you'll wait until there's someone in the room who stayed. Then read it together, and do what it says." And she had Ackley seal it and put it in the desk in that room, and she made me promise not to open it by myself. His hand tightened on the notebook. And then she was gone, and there was no one who stayed, because I made sure of it. I emptied the building. 5 of them. 6 of you. I kept everyone at the length of a locked door, so that I would never have someone in the room, so that I would never have to keep the promise, so that I would never have to read the last thing my wife ever said to me and find out whether I could bear it. A long breath. "So every 19th I carry up her flower, and I stand here, because standing here is the closest I can come to keeping a promise by refusing to. That is the whole secret, Miss Kelly. That is what Whit calls hiding, and Ackley calls cowardice, and I have called grief for 9 years. It is all 3. The strip of sealed door stood pale between them. Down in the glass tower, a clock she couldn't see counted toward 2, and Maren looked at this cold, careful, unraveling man holding a flower in a water glass, and did the plain, unprotected things she had been doing to difficult men and difficult days for 6 years. "Then, I'm someone who stayed," she said. "Bring her up." Sister Ackley came off the lift into the residence without hurry, a tall, spare woman in grey summer linen, silver-threaded hair pinned back hard, a face weathered by 9 northern winters, and no softer for them. She stopped when she saw Julian at the end of the hall with the geranium, and something in the upright column of her went, for one instant, to water, and then held. "You still carry it up," she said. Her voice was the hard, upright hand from the letter-made sound, precise, pressed, nothing wasted. 9 years. I hoped you'd have stopped. Stopping would have meant you'd healed. Carrying it means you've only been standing here. She came down the hall slowly. "Hello, Julian. You put the folder in the agency's hands," he said. "You planted my wife's writing on a stranger." "I did." No flinch. "Every year I telephoned that agency under a different name and asked how the placements were going at Ashford Holdings, and every year a woman lasted 3 months, or 1, or a week, and left, and I understood you were doing exactly what I was afraid you'd do, building the locked door higher." Her chin lifted. "This spring they told me the 5th had given notice, and a 6th was being sourced. So I drove down. I copied the first page, only the gentle one, only be patient with him, and I had it slipped into the profile, and I sat in a rented room across the park, and I waited to see whether the 6th one would carry a dead woman's kindness up 41 floors and stay." "Don't call her that," Julian said, low. "I'll call her what she is, because pretending otherwise is the whole sickness of this house." But Ackley's eyes had gone bright and hard at once. "Eleanor made me a promise too, Julian, the twin of yours. She said, 'Don't bring him the last page until he's let someone stay. He'll try to grieve alone forever, sister, he's built for it. So you watch. And when there's finally a person in that room who won't run, you bring him the copy, and you make him read it, whether he wants to or not.'" She reached into the flat grey bag at her side and drew out a single folded sheet, soft worn at the creases, carried 9 years. "I've kept this against my ribs through 9 winters, waiting for you to let one human being close enough to count. And then the 5th one walked out, and Whit Calloway started telephoning board members, and I knew if I waited for you to be ready, you'd hand the whole truth to your wife's brother to use as a knife. So I stopped waiting to be gentle." Her jaw set, so like his that Maren felt the room tilt. "That's why the second page was cruel. I meant it to be. Cruelty was the only thing left that moved you. You'd have gone to the board. Julian's knuckles were white on the notebook. You wrote that you would. I would never have gone to the board. Flat, absolute, I wrote it to frighten you into the room before Whit could drag you into it. There is a difference between a push and a betrayal, and I have spent my life learning which is which at bedsides you will never sit at." She held the folded page out across the last few feet of pale stone. "This is Eleanor's. The last thing she said, in her words, that I wrote down with my own hand, because hers wouldn't. I have never read it aloud. She told me it wasn't mine to read, it's yours." Her voice, for the first time, cracked down the middle. "Take it, Julian, and this time don't stand in the hall." He did not take it. Instead, he set the geranium down on the console beside the coffee, very carefully. And he reached into his trouser pocket and drew out a small dark key worn soft at the teeth, older than the brass one in Maren's pocket. The one key that never left him. He looked at it in his palm as though he had forgotten it could be used for anything but carrying. "She said not alone," he said. He turned to Maren, and the whole of the frost was gone now, every degree of it, and what was left was just a man at a door. "You said you're someone who stayed." "I'm still here," Maren said. "Then stay through this." And he held out his free hand, not for the letter, for her, and Maren crossed the last of the pale stone and put her hand in his, and his fingers were cold and they closed around hers hard, and neither of them looked away, and this time when they touched, neither of them pretended it was nothing. He put the key in the lock. It turned with the small grief of a mechanism that has waited 9 years to be needed, and Julian Ashford opened the door he had stood outside of every 19th, and the sealed room breathed out at them, dust and beeswax and old paper, and, impossibly, faintly, the ghost of a woman's scent kept alive in a room no air had moved through, and the white summer light fell in from a window no one had covered, across a small writing desk, across a chair pushed back as though its occupant had just stepped out, across 9 years of stillness, and he led Maren over the threshold, and Sister Ackley stood in the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth and did not follow, because it was not her room, and never had been. Inside, the light was gold where the hall had been bronze, a shelf of well-broken books, a pot on the sill where a plant had long since gone to a soft brown memory of itself. And on the desk, in a shallow tray, the pen Eleanor could not hold at the end, lying exactly where a hand had set it down. Julian stood in the middle of the room he had sealed and shook, once, all through, and steadied, because Marin's hand was still in his. "Read it to me," he said. "Please, I've carried it 9 years in that room and I can't be the voice that opens it. Let it be yours." He pressed Eleanor's folded page into her free hand. "You're the one who stayed." She'd have wanted the voice that stayed. Marin unfolded the soft-worn sheet. The upright pressed hand of Sister Ackley filled it, but the words underneath were unmistakably the quick warm loops that leaned toward you, dictated by a woman whose hands had failed, but whose sentences never did. She read, and she kept her own voice level, because the words did not need help. "The last rule," she read, "is the only one I wrote for you, Julian, and not for the ones who'll come after. Here it is, and then there are no more, and you are free of the list forever. If you are hearing this, then you finally let someone stay long enough to read it with you. Which means the miracle I spent my last strength praying for has happened, and you are not alone in that room, and I can rest." Julian made a sound and pressed the back of his free hand to his mouth. Marin read on. "So look up from this page. Look at whoever stayed. That is the whole of what I wanted for you. Not a shrine, not a sealed door, not a man standing in a hallway, carrying my flower until his own hands are old. Look up, and then do these things, in order, because you always did like an order. Unseal this room. Let the girl who waters the geraniums come in and open the window. Put my flower in water on a table where you eat, not on a sill to dry. And the 19th, oh my love, the 19th. Marin's voice did catch there, once, and she let it, and went on. "Stop keeping it as the day you lost me. Keep it as the day you first told me you loved me. 40 floors up, terrified, in a building that didn't even have the glass in yet. That was a 19th too. Take the date back, and be kinder to yourself than the world was to me. That is the last rule. There is no page after this one. You have kept a dead promise for long enough, now keep a living one. Go down out of the tower and let them see you do it. I was never behind that door, Julian. I was always going to be wherever you finally decided to live." The room was silent except for the far pulse of the city through glass that, in here, someone had left able to open. Julian let go of Marin's hand only to cross to the window and unlatch it, and it gave with a groan and a puff of warm July air that pushed into 9 sealed years all at once. The smell of hot stone and cut grass and roasting nuts rising 41 floors from a street that had never stopped living, and he stood in it with his eyes shut and let it move across his face. And behind him in the doorway Sister Ackley finally wept, upright, without a sound, the way a fence post would weep if it could. "Grace kept the geraniums," Julian said, without turning, his voice wrecked and steady at once. "For 9 years she kept a flower alive in a house that never opened a window, because Eleanor liked them, and I never once asked her why she bothered." He turned then, and his face was wet, and he did not hide it. "I've been so unkind. To all of them. To you." He looked at Marin, to myself most of all, and I called it faithfulness. "You can stop now," Marin said gently. That's what she wrote, word for word. "You're allowed to stop." He looked at the pen on the desk. He looked at the open window. He looked at the small dark key still in his hand. And then he looked at the slim gold clock face of his own watch, and something came back into his spine. Not the frost, but a straightening. "It's 20 to 2, he said. "Whit is downstairs telling 40% of my company that I don't have the nerve to walk into a room." A breath. "Eleanor wrote go down and let them see you do it." He crossed to the desk and, very carefully, lifted the geranium from its water glass and dried its stem on his sleeve. "I've spent 9 years letting wit describe me to rooms I refuse to enter. I think I'd like, just once, to describe myself." He looked at Marin, and at Ackley in the doorway. "Will you both come down? I don't want to keep any of this behind a door anymore." That was the whole mistake. The 14th floor boardroom had a wall of glass gone white with the July glare, and a long pale table, and 11 board members arranged around it in summer weight suits, and Whit Calloway standing at the head of it mid-sentence, sand-coloured and silver-templed, his brochure smile fully deployed, when the door opened at 4 minutes to 2, and Julian Ashford walked in carrying a single white geranium. The sentence Whit had been building fell out from under him. "Julian?" He recovered fast. He always did. "You came." I confess I wondered. "And you've brought flowers and your assistant." And his eyes found the upright grey figure behind Merrin, and, for the first time in 9 years of Merrin's brief acquaintance with him, Whit Calloway's face simply stopped. Sister Ackley. "Hello, Whit," Ackley said. "You've gotten older and no kinder. Your sister would be sorry to see it. Sit down, all of you." Whit's smile came back, but the hinge of it had loosened. "This is a board meeting, not a whatever this is. We have a stewardship question on the floor. I've moved that the chairman address it in person, without proxy, and I see he's finally in person, so he spread his hands to the table. Julian, the floor is yours. Explain to these 11 people what you do one afternoon a month behind a locked door that is so sacred it outranks the company my sister built. Explain the 19th. Out loud. That's all I've ever asked." The room waited. The glare pressed white against the glass. Julian set the geranium down in the middle of the long, pale table, in its water, where they could all see it, and he did not sit. "I'll tell you," he said. His voice carried without rising. "For 9 years, on the 19th of every month, I have gone up to the residence and stood outside my wife's study and been unable to open the door, because Eleanor asked me on her last day not to open the last thing she wrote for me, unless there was someone in the room who had stayed. And I made certain, for 9 years, that no one ever stayed. I drove them off. 5 assistants. Anyone who came close. I called it grief, and I called it standards, and it was neither. It was fear." He let it sit in the bright, cold room. "You've wanted me to say that out loud in front of witnesses, Whit. There it is. I've been hiding. You were right about that much." A stir went around the table. Whit's smile widened by a fraction, scenting the win. "Then the board will understand," Whit began. "Why a change in—" I haven't finished. Julian did not raise his voice. He simply did not stop, and the room bent to it. "This morning, I opened the door. There was someone who stayed. He did not look at Merrin, and somehow, the whole table looked at her anyway. And I read the last rule my wife left me. She wrote that she was never behind that door, that she was always going to be wherever I finally decided to live. So here is what the board is actually voting on today. Not whether a man who grieves in private is fit to lead. Whether a man who has decided, this morning, at the age of 38, to stop grieving in private and start living in public, is someone you want at the head of this company." He put both hands flat on the table. "If the answer is no, I'll go, today, and Whit can have the chair he's wanted for 9 years. But you'll be voting out the man who just walked in with a flower and told you the truth, not the ghost who wouldn't come to meetings. Those are different men. I only became the second one about 90 minutes ago." Silence. And then, unexpectedly, from the far end of the table, an old woman in navy linen, the longest-serving director, Merrin would learn, who had known Eleanor, set down her pen. "Whit," she said, "your sister asked us all to look after him. Not to unseat him. I've sat through 2 years of your telephone calls, and I've never once heard you offer to look after anyone. Withdraw the motion." Whit stood very still. The white glare lay across his expensive shoes exactly as Merrin had once imagined it would. And something moved in his face that was not the brochure smile and not the patient cruelty. Something older and more broken that Merrin recognized. because she had just watched its twin open a door upstairs. "I loved her too," Whit said, and for once his voice arrived at the same time as his face. "That's the part none of you credit. I watched him seal her away behind a door and turn her list into a cage, and I could not stand that he got to keep her and lock her up while I got nothing. Not a room, not a rule, not a flower. So I told myself he was hiding, and I was accountable." He looked at the geranium in the middle of the table. "I wasn't accountable. I was jealous. 9 years of it." He drew a breath and straightened his cuff, the old gesture, but gently now, a man putting something down. "I withdraw the motion. And I withdraw the amendment. Vote Meridian, and go home." He looked at Julian. "She'd be glad you opened the door. She'd be furious it took a stranger, and me being cruel to make you. So would I, if I had any right left to be furious about anything in this family." "You have the right," Julian said quietly. "You're the only brother she had. Come up and see the room, Whit. The window's open now. It should have been open to you years ago. That's my fault too. It was not forgiveness handed over cheap. It was a door held ajar." And Whit Calloway, who smiled like a brochure and had made an art of cruelty that learned manners, put his hand briefly over his mouth, exactly the way his sister's frozen widower had done upstairs an hour before, and nodded, and could not speak. And that was the truest thing he had done in 9 years. The Meridian vote passed in 4 minutes, unanimous and dull, exactly as boring as Merrin had once promised she could make a room, though in the end she hadn't needed to. Summer went on the way summers do, thick and gold and unhurried, and the glass tower learned something it had forgotten how to do, which was to have its windows opened. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday evening the color of honey, Merrin rode up to the residence with a paper cup of coffee from the corner cart in each hand, and the citrus cold air of the lift had, to her ear at least, lost some of its museum hush. The East Hall door stood open now, and had since Friday the 19th. Eleanor's study had become the room where Julian actually worked when he worked from home. The window cracked to the evening. The geraniums moved in from the residence sill because Mrs. Okafor said they got better light in there, and Mrs. Okafor was never once wrong about a plant. Julian was at the small desk with his sleeves turned back, and he looked up when Merrin came in, and the thing his face did now, when she came in, was a thing it had not been able to do in the first week she'd known him. "You brought 2, he said, from the corner. "Not the machine." I decided the machine coffee was beneath the dignity of a reformed man. She handed him one, and kept one. "Grace says dinner's at 8, and if we're late she's giving our portions to the doorman, who apparently is owed several favors on account of a wager about how long I'd last." "How long did he give you?" "Wednesday. Week 1. She sat on the edge of the desk, which no assistant in the history of the building had ever done, and lived professionally to tell about. "He's out $40 and extremely bitter." Julian looked at her over the coffee, and the pale grey eyes that had once hunted for the flinch were doing something else entirely now, unguarded and warm and a little afraid, the way a person is afraid of a thing they've decided they want. "I'm not good at this," he said. "The saying of things. I've spent 9 years being fluent in exactly the opposite. So I'm going to say one true thing, badly, the way you once made me, and you can do whatever you like with it." He set the cup down. "I told you the first day I hadn't slept a full night in this apartment in 9 years. I slept the night I opened that door. I've slept every night since." His jaw did not set at the hinge. It had stopped doing that. "It isn't the door that fixed it. It's that when it opened, there was someone I trusted standing in the room. I don't want that to be a thing that happened once, on a Friday, in a crisis. I want it to be the ordinary way my life is now. With you. That's the true thing." It's badly said. Merrin looked at him. This man who had emptied a building rather than let one person close, holding still now while he waited to see what she'd do with his whole unlocked self. And she did not make it soft. And she did not pretend it was nothing. because she'd learned in this room that the truest things go plainly or not at all. It was well said, she told him. For a beginner. And she set her coffee down beside his, and she took his hand across the little desk where Eleanor had once left a pen she couldn't hold, and she held it. I stayed on Monday because of a folder I wasn't supposed to have. I'm staying now because of you. Those are different reasons. The second one's mine. She smiled, warm, no challenge in it, which had undone him in the beginning and undid him again now. Dinner's at 8. Kiss me before Grace comes looking, because if she catches us, she'll never let either of us forget it, and I intend to be the 7th person she teases about it for the next 40 years. He came around the desk, and outside the open window the July evening moved over the towers in long ribbons of gold, and the geraniums stood white against it. And 41 floors down the city answered itself horn for horn the way it always had. But up here, for the first time in 9 years, a window was opened to let the sound in, and a man who had guarded a door his whole grieving life leaned across a summer evening and kissed the woman who had refused to run, gently, like someone setting down a weight he had carried too long and finally, gratefully, put down. Down the hall, Mrs. Okafor stood in the doorway with the watering can she was not using, and Sister Ackley beside her with a card that this time would not come back, and Whit at the far window with his sister's flower in his sight line, and none of them said a word, because some doors you leave open not because there's nothing behind them anymore, but because, at last, there's nothing that needs to stay hidden. If this story warmed you, if you believe the coldest towers are only waiting for someone patient enough to open a window, stay with me. Subscribe, and let the quiet ones, the ones who stay, keep finding their way home here, one story at a time. I'll keep the kettle on.